Thank you. Just to start things off with the warning, this is fatality presentation. So like Sydney said this morning, if you need to leave the room, no judgment. No one will know why you're leaving the room. To start off, we recognize the first people's history, knowledge, and stories of the mountainous areas we enjoy. This presentation was created on the territory of the four nations, the Sinixt, Secwepemc, Ktunaxa, and Okanagan Silks. As a national organization, we also acknowledge the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit nations on whose land we live and recreate. To start off, I'd like to thank Jen Coulter. She did an excellent job of this presentation last year, and because it was so well done, I've reused her presentation format and structure. I've also carried forward several of the slides, including this one, which I really liked. She also provided me with a lot of assistance while preparing this presentation. I also want to thank all the SAR teams and guides and ski patrollers and all the avalanche professionals who respond to these events. Your professionalism was very noted this year in everything you do. To start off, I want to set the context for this presentation. The intention is not to be overly critical, but rather to learn from these events. It's important to remember that we are reflecting on these events with a hindsight bias, and that when we're reflecting on these events, all the uncertainty has been removed that would have existed at the time. So as we review these events, try to avoid thinking, that could never be me, and instead ask yourself, how could that have been me? And what conditions might have been present for me to be in that situation? Before we get into the data, I wanted to say the reflections in this presentation are my opinion based on limited information, and some inaccuracies may exist. While I was building this presentation, it was important for me to constantly reflect on the principles on this slide. I tried putting myself in their shoes and thought about how I might have reacted in these situations. And finally, you might come up with different reflections as we go through these incidents. If you do have any information that's missing or something that's incorrect, please reach out after and we'll make sure we correct them in our records. Here's a look at the 10-year moving average. Looking back at last year, when we met in Penticton, the total was at 9, and we were below the 10-year average. The Atwell Peak incident occurred at the end of May and brought last year's number to 12. Philip did a great job summarizing the Atwell Peak incident this morning, so I won't be covering it in this presentation. So while we're only at 7 this year and well below the 10-year average, the season's not over and this number could still change, although we all hope it doesn't. Here's a look at the last 2 years of fatalities by activity type. Last year was mostly snowmobilers and mountaineers, and then this year was once again dominated by skiing. If we look at the 10-year average by activity, snowmobile fatalities make up close to 40%. And if you tally up all of the skiing and snowboarding activities, which are in blue, they come to a very similar number at just under 40%. Then the remaining 22% is made up of mountaineering, snowshoeing, hiking, and workplace incidents. Before I get into the individual incidents, I wanted to highlight Avalanche Canada's basic procedures for dealing with serious or fatal incidents. For any incident in BC that involves search and rescue, the Emergency Management and Climate Readiness Provincial Duty Officer provides us with ongoing information regarding the rescue. This includes giving us an initial heads-up phone call and then providing us with updates about the incident as they receive them. Our first step is confirming whether the incident is actually a fatality or not, because many serious incidents are also reported to us, and many of them have a positive outcome. Our primary goal is providing an initial fatality report within 24 hours, but there are exceptions to this. This initial report includes information that may impact the recreating public, including avalanche size and type, failure plane, location, aspect, and elevation, and a basic description, ideally including an overview photo. The goal of including a photo is not to show any of the rescue details. Instead, we believe that by including an overview photo, we help the recreating public better visualize the kind of terrain and snowpack conditions that are producing dangerous avalanche conditions so that they might avoid similar types of terrain in their trip planning and decision making while those conditions persist. So here's an overview of the 2024-25 season. As you can see, all of the incidents were clustered in the Purcells and Central Rockies. Another notable thing about this year was how late into the season the first accident occurred on February 17th. I wanted to see how rare this is, so I made this chart showing the date of the first accident in each season going back to 1980. As you can see, it was more common in the 80s for the first accident to occur in the second half of the season. But since then, this year and 2013 were the only two seasons where the first accident didn't occur until February. And this does appear to be a relatively rare occurrence in the modern era. So as I just mentioned, the first avalanche fatality occurred on February 17th in the Rockies just outside Golden. This was the only incident this year which occurred outside of a public bulletin region. A group of two left on snowmobiles in the afternoon and rode to an area where they staged their snowmobiles. From there, they climbed the ridge for 3 hours, which took them longer than planned. The first rider triggered the avalanche near the top of the slope at around 5:30 p.m. The partner located the subject, who was found down 1.2 meters, dug them out, and did CPR until they were fatigued. There was no cell service at this location, so they had to travel to call for help. At this point, it was well past dark, so SAR did the recovery the next morning. So some reflection on this event. The avalanche occurred late in the day, and the group had no communication device in an area with no cell service. While these two factors likely didn't impact the outcome of this event, had the subject been recovered alive, this would have significantly impacted rescue efforts. It had been cold and dry for a prolonged period of time leading up to this event, so I speculate if faceting of the snow in the track impacted the run length, which was quite long, given the relatively small slab that initially released. The long run distance may have impacted the search time. Finally, there's no public bulletin for this region. In the nearby Purcell's region, we had the danger at low for an extended period of several days with only a dry loose problem. In Banff, the rating was moderate with an isolated wind slab problem. So while the location of this accident is much closer to the Purcell's region, the snowpack and avalanche problems were likely more similar to the Banff region. And it might not be clear to people when looking at our map, if you're in that Central Rockies area, where you should be getting your information from. The next accident occurred a week later on February 23rd. A group of 3 family members were snowmobiling in the Forester Creek snowmobile area. The terrain where the avalanche occurred is a steep slope which leads up to a large bench feature with a lake. The slope where the avalanche occurred is known to the sledding community as being a bad spot, and there's a more common, mellower route to access the lake which other riders had been using that day. One rider was high marking the slope and had just made the turn out when they triggered the slope. It was reported that there were up to 30 snowmobilers in the area, some of whom assisted in the rescue. It was reported that during the rescue there was difficulty with the transceiver search. A cell phone was found near the subject's transceiver, but the large number of riders in the area could have also been a source of interference during the rescue. It was also reported that the subject was wearing an airbag, but it was not deployed and the handle was tucked away. CPR was performed, but was reported as not being effective due to trauma. So reflecting on this event, as we already mentioned, transceiver interference may have impacted the search. However, given reports of trauma, it may not have affected the outcome. It was stormy on Saturday and then the conditions cleared off on Sunday. We had been at a combination of moderate and low danger in the Purcell's region during the week leading up to this event, and this storm on Saturday night was the tipping point for slab formation over the January week layer. And this was the first increase in the danger rating we had seen in a long time in this area. A period of clear weather after a storm is always a concern in our office because the perception of danger is often under... Sorry. Now there goes that. Can you scroll? Is often underestimated by recreational users. In this case, it appears the terrain choice was too aggressive for the conditions. The next 2 incidents both occurred on the same day on March 14th. The first occurred outside of the ski area boundary at Lake Louise. A pair of experienced backcountry skiers were skiing in the Pipestone Bowl outside the ski area boundary. After skiing the bowl, they were making their way back to the ski area and were ascending in walk mode. They had read the bulletin and were aware of the high danger rating. They had not planned to leave the ski area boundary that day, but had brought avalanche safety equipment just in case. They were not familiar with the area and were off the standard flagged traverse line, which put them into a steeper portion of the terrain. The party triggered an avalanche that propagated to the steeper terrain overhead, and the second skier was caught. The avalanche was 100 centimeters deep and failed on basal facets. This incident occurred shortly after a major storm, which roughly doubled the height of snow in parts of the Central Rockies. The avalanche was 300 meters wide and ran 250 meters in length. The subject was buried 1.5 to 2 meters deep. The partner conducted a transceiver search, extricated the skier, initiated first aid, and activated 911. Parks Canada Visitor Safety evacuated the party to emergency medical services, but unfortunately the subject did not survive. The main reflection for this event was the potential for a misperception of danger in forested terrain. During periods of elevated danger, we often think of forested terrain as being a safer terrain choice, but in this case, the weak layer was reactive enough to fail in forested terrain. We also speculate if there was some motivational bias and if the powder conditions after a long drought period impacted their decision to leave the boundary after having planned to stay in bounds that day. The second incident on March 14th occurred in the Black Prince backcountry ski area in Kananaskis country. The first skier in a group of 4 triggered the slope. The other 3 members of the group felt a collapse. The avalanche failed down 80 to 120 centimeters on the late January Basset Crust interface. The avalanche was 100 meters wide and ran 200 meters in length. The subject was carried into trees and was buried against a tree down 1 meter. The three other skiers in the party skied down, located the skier, and called for help. Kananaskis Mountain Rescue responded, provided medical assistance, and evacuated the skier to emergency medical services, but unfortunately, they did not survive. The main reflection here was the same as the previous incident, the potential for misperception of danger in forested terrain. In this case, the weak layer was connected and reactive enough to propagate through relatively tight trees. Also, terrain traps such as trees can increase the severity of any incident. While every avalanche accident is tragic and impacts members of our community, this one hits particularly close to home for many people in this room. On a personal level, I had met Jason at Selkirk Cat Skiing early in my career and had the privilege to have skied and dug pits with him during their guides training. He left a lasting impression on me, as I'm sure he did for everyone else in this room who knew him. I also realized shortly after this accident that I have close friends who were friends and colleagues of both Jeff and Alex, and I saw firsthand how much this incident impacted so many people in our community. The avalanche occurred naturally and impacted a group of 4 at a helicopter landing. The avalanche was reported as a size 3 persistent slab. The information presented here is exactly the same as the information that was posted on our website shortly after the incident, and this is intentional. The main thing I wanted to highlight here is Avalanche Canada's role in commercial and professional incidents. I mentioned earlier the procedures which we follow when reporting on avalanche fatalities in the short term. During this process, as soon as we learn that an incident is commercial or professional, we fully step back and we let the other organizations take the lead. Our primary goal here remains to gather the basic information that could impact the recreating public and nothing more. To wrap things up, I wanted to highlight a few of the trends and reflections from this season. While a small annual data set has its limitations, and it is important to also look at longer-term trends, we can still garner some trends from this year's incidents. Last year was dominated by skiing and snowmobiling and mountaineering, and this year swung back to being primarily related to skiing. 3 of the incidents this season may have involved a misperception of danger. This includes potentially overestimating the safety of skiing in trees or not recognizing the danger during the first period of clear weather after a storm. On a positive note, everyone was able to initiate self-rescue and had the gear to do so, and no one was traveling alone. And finally, while it's not a widespread trend this year, there is a longer-term trend involving safety equipment. This year included an incident without a proper communication device, potential transceiver interference during one incident, and an airbag that was not deployed. Oops. Lastly, I wanted to give a plug for Kristen's presentation tomorrow on the new accident database. This new database will bring all of the historical avalanche accident data in Canada into a single database. And I expect we will have some interesting long-term trends to present next year. That's all I have for you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. That was an excellent presentation. We have time for a couple questions, if anyone has some for Ryan. Alex.
I was just curious with the Capristo avalanche if there was any consideration after to start forecasting for that area.
It's certainly something that's on our mind. James Blair has been talking about it a lot, so we're certainly conscious of it. So TBD, and reach out to James if you have any specific questions. I'll switch that over to that.
Dave McClung here. I wondered if on the last two accidents you didn't list a crown, a slab thickness. I wonder if you could recall.
No, like I said, as soon as we learned it was commercial, professional, we stopped looking for information. I've seen no information, I've seen no photos. That was by design.
Right.
It's not our story to tell.